So here's a question. How can you seem more confident, more gracious, more charming when inside you're anxious, annoyed, sleep-deprived, and on a short fuse? Good question. Is it okay to pretend to be somebody that you're not? If people are looking at you for some confidence when all around you is chaos and calamity, how do you go about being yourself? Well, also be charming and also being calm and also being authoritative. These are good questions, aren't they? And today we're going to unpick those questions with our friend Viv Groskop, who is here because she's got a new book out, Happy High Status. What does that mean? We're going to be talking about that with her. If you don't know Viv, she was last here in 2019, actually on International Women's Day. 2019 seems like another country altogether, doesn't it? And she's the host of How to Own the Room. She was talking about her book and the beginnings of her podcast then. If you haven't listened to it, it's incredible. She's now done 157 episodes. It's in the top 1% of podcasts globally. Her most recent interviewees are Sophie Ellis-Bextor and Fatima Whitbread. She's had guests including Hillary and Chelsea Clinton, Margaret Atwood, Professor Mary Beard, and Logan Roy from Succession, Brian Cox. It's an amazing and fascinating listen. And she started her career in comedy. She was initially a journalist and a writer, then started her career in comedy by doing 100 live stand-up gigs in 100 days when she had 3 children under 6 years old. Wow. Why did she do that? It's interesting. Let's find out. And as I mentioned, she's the author of the book How to Own the Room, which is Women in the Art of Brilliant Speaking. Lift as You Climb, Women, Ambition, and How to Change the Story. The Anna Karenina Fix, and as a performance coach, she works with women and senior teams in business and organizations, helping them to redefine leadership and authenticity. You can learn a huge amount from Viv, I have, so please welcome, a very warm welcome to Viv Groskop.
Thank you. Thank you
Viv,
so much.
welcome back.
Oh, thanks,
really good to see you. Come and have a seat.
Cheers. Thank you. What a lovely introduction. I was listening to all of that, and as you were saying, how do you become more confident? Do you have to become like someone else? What do you do if you want to be at ease? I was thinking, yes, tell me, tell me. I think my obsession with this is born of my own feeling that, like, how do we do those things? Yeah. So I really wanted to open up that conversation, and I think those questions are at the heart of who we are. And you were mentioning, the last time I was here was in 2019 talking about How to Own the Room. And since then, our lives have been completely turned upside down. It's not always the case that we're together as much as we used to be. And I think these questions of who we are, how we present as authentic to people in lots of different circumstances, like how do you do that on screen? Something we wouldn't have even thought about 10 years ago.
You called it How to Own the Zoom.
How to Own the Zoom. Yeah. I never wanted to write about how to own the Zoom, but it's become part of our lives. Before COVID, I always tried to say to people, don't go on those calls. If you can avoid them, do less of those.
Don't say that here.
I know. But do as few of those calls as you can and make the calls valuable. But of course, now it is part of life. So how we define confidence and leadership and this ease that you were hinting at, it changes all of the time. Yeah. And it's so important for us to share what that might look like. And the idea behind Happy High Status is trying to open up people's concept of what confidence looks like, because it's not fixed. Yeah. It's not that you're born with it. Some people have it, some people don't. No, we all have it. It's just busting it out when you need it and feeling comfortable in uncomfortable situations.
Well, I'd love to unpack that and get more into what that means. But perhaps you alluded to this, your journey of getting interested in this topic, and I mentioned the kind of crazy stand-up sort of beginning of that journey.
Crazy stand-up.
Sounds crazy to me, I think most people. But so what made you fascinated by this, and maybe take us through sort of why you've done some of the different things that you've done in this journey of unpacking and sort of understanding this issue, because you've thought about it so deeply.
Yeah, I was a journalist, as you said, for most of my 20s and my 30s. I was mostly writing for The Guardian, The Observer, The Financial Times, worked for pretty much everybody as a freelancer. And I had, as my children were being born, and like my late 20s, early 30s, I had a very free career as a freelancer. I didn't have a boss that I could blame for my life. And so, yeah. And so when I started to have a bit of a sort of itch around my mid-30s, as my children were getting a little bit older and they weren't babies anymore, I suddenly had sort of, I was bored with my work, but I felt there was something missing. And I realised that I really wanted to perform because it was what I'd always wanted to do as a child. I used to watch Tracy Ullman and Victoria Wood and all of those performers when I was little, and I loved the energy that they had.
You were drawn to comedy.
Yeah, I was drawn to comedy. And I realised, and I think a lot of us realise this as we get older, if you are a creative person, there's nobody stopping you from doing the creative things that you want to do apart from yourself. So by that age, I realised, oh, nobody comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, oh, you look confident, why don't you try comedy? You have to tell that to yourself.
Yeah.
So I was old enough then to realise that. I was stupid enough to give it a go. My husband, who I'm, thank God, still with, because you said, why would you do that? That's exactly what my husband said. He was patient enough to support me through doing a massive career change and, you know, going out every night for 100 nights in a row, consecutive nights, doing this when my kids are very small. And I realised that at the heart of trying to do something new with your life, even if it's not something so public as stand-up, it is a question of self-confidence and how much you believe in yourself. And I realised, oh, it doesn't matter how much I learn about how to work a crowd, how great my material is, like those things are a given, they've got to be really good. It's all about what you read the second that somebody walks on stage. Do they like themselves or not? Are they comfortable with themselves? Are they a nice, I don't want to say the word nice person, but are they kind of okay? And I realised that it's that confidence that a lot of people are really lacking in. And it stops us from doing so many things. And the more I studied this and talked to people about this, which grew into this podcast, House We're in the Room, and talked to other performers about it, I realised that it's so subjective. You know, you really have to discover it for yourself, almost as an artistic act. And I realised over time as well that we have so many amazing examples now of what confidence looks like, which if you compare it to, say, 50 years ago, you wouldn't have seen then YouTube, you know, a million examples of Instagram lives, TED Talks, you know. We're completely surrounded by examples of, I don't even want to call it confidence. I'm going to want to call it happy high status, because it's often somebody like Greta Thunberg, who is a quiet, non-bombastic, non-extrovert speaker who really cuts through because she learned how to give impact in 60 seconds whilst being herself. You know, we have so many great examples of that. So what I wanted to encourage people was to find a way of being in themselves that feels good to them and not be hamstrung by this idea that, oh, only confident people can do certain things, or I can only speak up if I'm confident. No, it doesn't work like that.
So I think at the heart of, you know, the genesis of the book and How to Own the Room is this notion of confidence, and you sort of slightly reject the word. So you said there a few things. You know, you want to look confident, put the audience at ease, but you might not feel confident. We're not born confident. We find it within ourselves. And then you've chosen to use different words to describe it more. So can you sort of help us understand how you reached that sort of conclusion about what confidence is?
I really wanted to, obviously we have to use the word confidence in the same way that we have to use the words public speaking, even though everyone hates what that represents. But these are what these things are. But I try to move it away from confidence because I feel there are so many people who've received mixed messages about confidence, often from childhood. And some of this is cultural, some of it's to do with bias, all kinds of messaging that we receive from family, from culture, from patriarchy, from hierarchy, of either you're too confident, why don't you pipe down? Or, oh, you're not confident enough, why are you so shy? You know, we hear people saying these things to children all of the time, but they're usually pretty empty. So when I see people saying that to a child, I often think, well, that child is very sensitive. Maybe they're going to grow up to be a writer or an artist. You know, why are you asking them to step up and be someone they're not? That's not what confidence is. And similarly, if people are quite outspoken or joyous, It doesn't make them overconfident and arrogant. So many cultural things here as well. Right. Britishness can be a very interesting flashpoint for what we think of as confidence. You know, we often think, oh, Americans are confident, British people are not. And we have all of these ridiculous stereotypes that are unhelpful. Yeah. And in acting, in comedy, in improv, there's this idea of status, which was originated by the director Keith Johnston through the 60s and the 70s. And it's all about where you stand in relation to other people. So do you make other people feel comfortable? That's what happy high status is. Do you seek to impose and lord it over other people? That's high status. Do you defer to other people? That's low status. And whenever we're watching an interaction, you know, you can observe this in your own family, who's up, who's down, who's got the most status, who hasn't. It's got nothing to do with really how much money you've got, what kind of car you've got, all of those things that we traditionally call status. It's to do with the relationships. And you mentioned about Brian Cox, Logan Roy being on the podcast, and Succession is a great example of this because everyone in Succession has status. You know, they have amazing social status and wealth and all of those stereotypical trappings. But the whole status play of that drama is about their emotional status in regard to each other, who's up, who's down, who's in favour, who's out of favour. And so this idea of happy high status is all about not participating in that, not trying to get one over on other people or defer to them or suck up to them. It's about being in a generous, magnanimous energy where you allow anything to happen.
So I think we can understand a bit more about that. By the way, we'll come to all of you for questions and conversation with Viv in a moment. As I look at the book, and you were kind enough to share an early copy of it with me. One of the things you do in this is you bring it to life, this idea, through a whole array of different ways of looking at it. For example, be like a comedian, be like a wise guy, mafia energy without the murdering.
Yes, so, without the murdering is an important part of the mafia energy.
Maybe just pick an example like that. Well, just talk about how you bring it to life through a particular lens or two.
Well, that was really key for me when I first started performing stand-up. Was, you know, how to get people to realise that you're in charge. And when you think about that energy of a wise guy or someone in the mafia, I'm thinking like Robert De Niro. Anyone you can think of from Goodfellas or Sopranos, you know, those people just own the room and you wouldn't mess around with them. You know, the flip side of that is because they would kill you. Yeah. But how do you bottle that energy and use it for good? Because before they kill anyone, the attraction
they still have the status.
Those kind of people they're charismatic, they're generous, you want to please them, they make you feel as if the sun is shining upon your face. I mean, how do you achieve that, especially as a woman, and especially as, you know, somebody who isn't, you know, say if you want to have wise guy energy, obviously you can't do that unless you look like an Italian American, like from the 1970s. So how do you do that if you don't fit into this mold? And so I became fascinated with this idea of how you create that status for yourself. And there is a story of Ray Liotta being cast in Goodfellas.
Yeah, tell us that.
And how he had a meeting with the director. And at the moment that they were due to meet in this hotel, so this must have been, I guess, late 60s, early 70s, before the movie was made. They had this meeting in the hotel, and part of the hotel was closed off for a completely separate reason, and there were some security guards. And the director watched Ray Liotta come in, negotiate with security guards about whether he could go through, and then accept that he wasn't going to be allowed to go through, as not playing the character, but as himself. And he realised in that moment, the director, oh, that guy, he can play someone who is happy high status. And I can see if as an actor, he can then transform that into something more sinister. Mm-hmm. But I know that he's got that compassionate, yes, I will comply with your security requirements, but I'm still keeping my status. Mm-hmm. He's got that energy. Mm-hmm. And that status is something that we read all of the time in other people. The thing I think is really interesting is that predominantly over the last 100 years of TV and film and watching things like The Apprentice or all kinds of business scenarios and tech scenarios, and we predominantly see this energy or this status and this charisma from men, and from particular kinds of men often. And I'm just so fascinated to see and work out and open this conversation as to, well, what else does it look like? Because it can look like a million different things. And I know from the podcast, you know, from everyone from Hillary Clinton to Professor Mary Beard, Anne-Marie Imafidon, Abadesios and Sade, I know that there's no answer. It's individual. You have to make it up for yourself. If there was a rule book, we would already have equality and parity across all things. There isn't. So it's really about finding that permission to, uncover your inner wise guy.
So when you embarked on we'll come back to different archetypes maybe of happy high status. When you embarked on your journey of the podcast, you were presumably thinking, well, who would be interesting to have on? And what do I want to ask them about? So help us understand how you thought about that, because you've got a fascinating, you've alluded to, a fascinating sort of cast of characters.
Yeah,
so how do you go after them?
The podcast was in some ways counterintuitive, and it was a bit of I always think it's a bit of a measure of me having, I hate the expression imposter syndrome, because I don't think it really exists, and I could get into a whole conversation about that, but an insecurity. I had an insecurity when the book came out, How to Own the Room, that this is just me, this is just what I think, this is what I've observed in stand-up, this is what I think about Michelle Obama's performance style, this is what I think about Joan Rivers, all of these things. And when the book came out, I just had this real feeling of, the book's really good, by the way, but I had this real feeling of, oh no, this is a really selfish act that I've imposed upon the world, and who is it for me to tell people how to own the room? And because I felt that way, I thought, well, if I make a podcast, then I can just interview loads of other people and ask them. So lots of books grow out of podcasts, but my podcast grew out of my own insecurity about my book. Go psychoanalyze that.
You had unhappy low status.
Exactly. Unhappy low status. And it was also that I'm always desperate to uncover more about this, because I'm fascinated by the fact that we have all been educated for the last 100 years, you know, broadly. You know, we could have more global literacy. I hope we will continue to have more global literacy. It's not perfect, but broadly, our education level is high. Our literacy levels are high. You know, there's broadly democracy, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, so many stereotypes and biases persist. So many people feel small, feel they can't speak out, feel they're held back. And so many people are labouring under this misconception that there's some sort of rule book or Machiavellian manual that will uncover everything for you, and it's just not true. And so I wanted to use the podcast to uncover that and show there isn't a perfect way to give a speech. There isn't a perfect way to stand up and speak. It doesn't matter who you are, you can find a way to do it.
And actually, one of the things interesting when you listen to an array of interviews is how different the perspectives are, even from people who come from similar sort of professions, or, you know, actresses or sports stars or whatever. Yeah,
the really interesting thing I've discovered, because they are all quite distinct, all of these guests, but the thing that often emerges as a commonality is generational differences.
Right.
I really noticed that anyone I interview who's broadly over 50 or 60, and anyone who's under 35, their views are going to be completely different. So a lot of women I've interviewed who are older will talk about trying to maintain certain standards or dress a certain way or repress certain parts of themselves. Alini Santos of Unilever is a fantastic example of this. You know, when she was the first woman in the boardroom, she made sure she wore a suit with padded shoulders. She had glasses with a clear glass, so people would think she was like a serious person. And for younger women, when they listen to that, they just think, I would never want to work in a world where I had to do that. Yeah. And much younger women saying, well, I don't want to go to a company where I can't wear trainers because that's mad. So there's a very interesting superficial differences. Often they can reflect an industry as well. Certain industries still have norms. And trying to open this out, showing people that a lot of this is about picking your battles and recognizing context. For me, I can go into any situation and pretty much speak however I want. There's no repercussions really other than on me. But when you're in a job, there are certain norms.
So that generation divide is really an interesting one. I don't mean to interrupt, except that you just sparked a story about Alini Santos I'd like to share from me, because many of the teams here know her. She's a senior leader at Unilever. She was behind the Campaign for Real Beauty, which is an iconic kind of shift in how advertising was done. And she was telling me she grew up in Brazil at the time the movie Alien came out. Do you know this?
Yeah, she loves telling the story. It's a great story. Let me just tell it for a minute. Her name's Alini, but the translator for the movie misspelled alien, and they spelled it Alini. And so she was known as the alien at her school, which she didn't like. And then she went to see the movie, and it's the first real movie where the lead character is an action woman. Ripley, which is Sigourney Weaver.
Sigourney Weaver, and she was like, "Okay, that is me," and that was what kicked her off. So a bit like your sort of approach here, she suddenly found somebody who had probably unhappy high status in the case of Ripley, but that really lifted her out of kind of feeling bullied and being tagged as the alien.
Yeah, those kind of stories I think are so important because they show that she's a very powerful and fascinating woman who doesn't look as if she would have, experienced bullying or something like that. Yeah. And yet to hear her tell that story it's very sweet and funny.
So we might get her in, actually. He's prompted me to kind of think about inviting her in to tell her
great.
story.
But she's a great example of old school.
Yes.
If she turns up, she will wear a power suit.
And so let's go to the other end, though. So you said to the younger generation that you're talking to, what are you seeing that's different there?
Well, younger people are I sound about 156 now that I'm saying this, but I am basically. My children will be like, but you are really old. And they'll ask me about things that happened like in the late 90s and refer to it as the olden times. But that's fair enough, I met my husband in 1998 and I didn't own a mobile phone. And he had to explain to me what Ask Jeeves was. And when I told him I was coming here today, he said, "Oh, you're going to Ask Jeeves, are you?" Yeah.
We've got some people here who were at Ask Jeeves.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, yeah. So I do remember those times. But it's so different, the expectations that people have. I'm not a big fan of the labels of millennial, Gen X, Gen Z, etc. They just describe behaviours that in the way that imposter syndrome does too, that just broad brush. But broadly speaking, there's definitely a resistance to hierarchy. And hierarchy is a form of status amongst younger people, which I think is really positive. Unfortunately, it doesn't always marry with reality. And I've done so many events where I have a young woman in particular. I've done so many events for women because How to Own the Room was at first aimed predominantly at women. And a young woman might put her hand up and say, "I can't get heard in a meeting. I have so many contributions to make. Can you tell me how to get my point across in a meeting?" And I would perhaps give some tips. And then her boss would come up to me at the end afterwards and say, "I really wish you hadn't done that." She's someone who thinks that she can run the company and has no experience. And so there's a tension there, that, and this idea as well that I think is fascinating of how many people can be around the table, can be on the board. And then some people will say, and I think it's a TED Talk, get a bigger table. Okay, well, how big are you going to make this table? So there's a lot of resistance and discomfort there. And it always ties in for me as well with stand-up and comedy, because in that situation, you have to accept and you have to force the idea of, I've got the microphone, you better listen to me. And that energy is very contrary to the democratization of power and speaking that a lot of us are investigating at the moment. So I think being able to move between these modes, which is what Happy High Status allows you to do, you sort of stand back and think, is this a good time for me to speak and put my point across? Yes. Is this actually a time for me to listen really, really carefully? Maybe that would be better. Being more judicious, not always speaking up just for the sake of it. I think speaking up for the sake of it has become a really overrated phenomenon.
Right.
And, you know, I say this as somebody who's just been speaking for about 5 minutes, but a lot of us could do with being more quiet and listening more. And the older I get, the more I try to do that and make space for other people.
Fascinating. And so when you came to put this together, this came out of, I guess, reflecting on lots of the interviews you've done. What spurred you to craft this? And it's very rich with chapters, examples, vignettes, examples of people who exhibit the different traits you talk about. What led you to this, and how do you think about sort of structuring
Yeah,
it?
it was really that this idea of happy high status first came up for me when I first started doing stand-up, and it completely changed the way that I responded to hostile situations or difficult moments, to being heckled, to getting 1-star reviews, to getting, you know, you have the stress of getting everything from a 1-star review and a 5-star review for the same show. So how do you know if it's any good?
So for those of you who haven't done stand-up, I mean, just take us through, like, what's it like being heckled, and how do you react to it before and after, kind of thinking about this?
So to align it with this idea of status, in a heckle situation, if you are too high status and too forceful in responding to a heckle, the audience is going to see, oh, that person is really being triggered. They're very sensitive. They can't take it. So you have to be able to turn it around in a way that almost feels like, all right, you want a piece? Yeah, come on, what else? You have to have something that has a bit of ease about it. So learning how to almost, it's called incorporation in comedy. You try to incorporate these things whilst also sending the subtle message of, yeah, this is not a free-for-all. You know, you don't want that to spread. But then sometimes you do have to literally shut somebody down because they're bothering the rest of the audience. So having that very subtle feeling of when you can be forceful, when you can be gentle. Sometimes, you know, early on in comedy, I would realise I'd come down on a heckler really hard, too hard for my benefit, and actually kind of crushed them. And that's something I really feel uncomfortable about in comedy sometimes, actually. So you have to learn how to just handle those situations with a bit of subtlety. And the person I was always observing this in outside of stand-up, which was around the time I started developing the ideas for the book and the podcast, How to Own the Room, was Michelle Obama. So the second chapter about How to Own the Room is all about her. And when the book came out in 2018, she was the person everybody wanted to talk about. And she, for me, is a perfect example of happy high status, as is Barack Obama. Very at ease, magnanimous. There's a fantastic piece of footage of, there's loads of footage of Barack Obama being happy high status. There's one where he's being interviewed about economic policy and he just catches a fly while he's being interviewed. I know, I mean, and the other ones where he's talking to somebody in a situation like this, and someone on the front row is talking to him very aggressively about gun control and how there shouldn't be gun control. And he leans into the conversation, he rolls his sleeves up and says, tell me more about why you think this. And that's happy high status, is leaning into a difficult conversation, hearing people out, not agreeing with them, but hearing them out. And people were always saying to me, where can I read more about happy high status? And eventually I thought, okay, well, I'll write the book then. Because you can read a lot about status in the context of theatre and comedy and performance in Keith Johnston's work. But to apply it to everyday life, that's a whole other experiment I'm trying to introduce here.
So, and help us understand how you think about being yourself, but portraying happy high status. If yourself is feeling anxious, as I was saying at the beginning, you know, concerned, didn't sleep very well, short fuse, but you want to portray happy high status.
Is there something
but
you
you're trying
want to
to be
tell us,
authentic.
Yeah.
This is a different show altogether.
Well,
I've got
there's
a load
a
of
chapter in the there's a chapter in the book which examines the idea of just be yourself. Just relax. And I was always told this early on in stand-up, like, just be yourself. And I was like, myself wants to go and dig a hole and die. Like, I can't just be myself. So what does that look like? I conceive it as who you are when you're not under pressure. So this could be if you have a good relationship with your family, not everyone does, but if you have people in your family that you feel comfortable with, what does that feel like? If you're with your friends who you get on with and who really like you and you like them, What does that feel like? Certain work colleagues, you just feel at ease with them. That is your happy high status. And it's not going to look the same on everyone. For somebody, it's going to be you hold court and you tell jokes and you love a bit of banter. For someone else, it's going to be you're supportive and you're calm and you're the person who's quite peaceful or the peacemaker. There's a million different ways. Everyone on the planet has a different means of being. We see that, in our everyday interactions. We don't expect all of our friends to be the same or all of our family members or colleagues to be the same. Everybody has different energy. So it's thinking about that, and there's lots of exercises on the book about how to identify those moments and almost step out of them and see yourself in those moments. So you can think, oh, yeah, I'm being happy high status now. Oh, that's what it feels like. That's how I behave. That's how I sound. And identifying it. And then the more you identify it, the more you see when you are it effortlessly without even trying, the more you can think, well, how can I try and bring that into a situation that is really pressured? How can I be like that when I'm in a job interview? Not that anybody here should go for a job interview.
Internally.
How can I be like that when I'm under a spotlight and people are expecting something of me? Because we are all always the same person. We are all always the person that we are with our beloved friends and family and beloved colleagues.
But you're just trying to access the sort of low-stress version of yourself and bring it to that moment in some way.
Exactly. And also, the more you think about it in yourself, the more you observe it in others. So I give loads of examples from film and TV, politics, sport, business, of people we can look at and think, Succession's a great example, and I've got a lot of stuff about Shiv in there. I don't want to spoiler the ending, but she does not have a happy high status ending. But there are many moments in that when Shiv as a character is one of the most happy high status because she's inhabiting her power, she's finding out who she is. And the actress who plays Shiv, Sarah Snook, she's Australian, and she talked a lot about how in the beginning of filming she wasn't certain about finding quite the right accent. So she decided that one of Shiv's her modus operandi would be to sit back a bit and maybe just watch things and only very judiciously comment because she wasn't 100% sure about ad-libbing and improvising. A lot of the dialogue is improvised. And that's how she found Shiv's happy high status. So the more you think about it in yourself, the more you learn to see it. Drama is an incredible place to watch out for high status when a character is pushing too hard, low status when somebody defers, and this happy high status when there's middle position. In Succession, I always say the most consistently happy high status is Connor, who is the sibling who doesn't really care. He doesn't really want to win. He
thinks he's going to be the president of the US.
Well, but he's happy. He doesn't really care whether he actually is or not. He just wants to give it a go. I don't suggest any of the examples that I give ever are a person to aspire to. So I'm not saying let's all be like Connor Roy because he's a great person. It's about recognizing that these qualities are subjective and recognizing that the most important thing is to be okay with yourself. That's the first thing that people read in you.
And that's really interesting. I picked out a bit in the book where you sort of say there are situations where you can't be yourself, where being authentic is sort of a bad move professionally and so on. So how do you deal with that kind of tension?
Yeah, context is so important. And it's like what I was saying earlier about the limitations of certain industries, of your position in a hierarchy, because hierarchies, we might pretend that they don't exist. They always do, whether they are stated or unstated. And recognizing that sometimes what you think of as your authentic self might be incredibly dangerous in some environments. And you have to be judicious about that. I've talked a lot to women, especially on the podcast, about this, especially in corporate culture, where people are trying to subtly change things or switch up. Let's go from being a culture where everybody has to wear a shoulder-padded suit to being a culture where you can wear trainers. actually has been quite a slow thing.
Yeah.
You know, if we'd come into, well, we couldn't have come into an environment like this 30 or 40 years ago because it wouldn't have existed. But if we had, we would all be dressed completely differently and the makeup of this room would be completely different. So these things do change over time. So you have an ability to push that boundary of authenticity. And I think in a way that's all of our task in our work and in our lives, is to create progress by saying, well, I know we've always done it like this, but let's just try something slightly different. But you have to be very judicious and wise about the boundaries of that. You can't just go in and say, well, this is my authentic self and I'm a naturist. So everybody get used to it, right? That might be your authentic self. Good. Go and do that on the weekend. No judgment. You can't be your authentic self in every situation, but you can not be inauthentic. You can be more neutral. You don't have to be fake.
Right, you can just be a slightly different version of yourself.
You can be the authentic version that is appropriate for that context.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. I want to come to the audience for questions. So if you're in the room, you can access the mic. If you can't, you have to send an email later or something. So please do come to the mics. And you alluded to this a bit, Viv, when you spoke about how few sort of role models there were historically for women to see what happy high status looked like. What have you found about the differences for women and men? You talked about the generation. Your podcast was very much focused on women initially, but I think you've developed a view that actually this is much more broad.
Yeah, I feel very strongly that many of the issues that we talk about in relation to women are broader, you know, and the word intersectional has anticipated this. Me, I'm like, oh, intersectionality is a thing. Yeah. It's so much broader than relating it to one group of people. I always want to do this work on behalf of women and with women and speaking to women because it sort of drives me crazy that the progress that we've made is so slow. But I also recognise how transferable that conversation is and how important it is. Now, I just interviewed the comedian Tom Allen on the Happy High Status episodes of the podcast, where I'm getting lots of people to examine what does that mean to you. And he talks about, you know, he's a comedian, he's gay, he had a very stable upbringing and his parents really encouraged him to be a performer, but he found that as soon as he started performing, he was constantly experiencing feelings of self-sabotage and not feeling comfortable with himself and always putting himself down, which didn't come from his background, it just came from his own inner critic. And he calls this being confidently insecure. So allowing yourself to be insecure, be vulnerable, have doubts about things. Of course, he says on stage, people don't really want to see a comedian, they want to see a human being. You know, and a human being is vulnerable, is insecure. So be that, but be it confidently. Don't be ashamed of it. And so many conversations like that have reminded me that we have so much to learn from each other. And sometimes it's often the opposite. You know, when Brian Cox was on the podcast, I always start that asking, what does it mean to you to own the room? And he was on with his wife, Nicole Ansari, who has a cameo in the final episode of Succession as one of Logan's mistresses. Brilliant that she got that role. And she gave a beautiful description of what it means to own the room and how it's about feeling at ease and making other people feel at ease. And when I came to ask Brian Cox, what does it mean? He said, well, I don't understand the question. It just sounds very proprietorial to me. I don't like the idea of owning the room. I don't understand why you're asking.
And in that moment, what was he doing? Yeah.
And his wife turned to him and said, well, of course you think that because you own every room that you walk into.
Yeah, just by saying that, exactly.
And you haven't ever had to think about it. So that flip side of the conversation is also really interesting, is examining entitlement and people who don't even realise that they have it. Because, you know, I always say power is not given, it's taken. Those who have entitlement, they're not going to want to give it up. You know, it's a bit of a waste of time trying to convince them to give it up. But to hear them talk about it and to open up that conversation and show, well, not everybody feels that way. Not everyone walks into a room and owns it. I think it's really fascinating and really important.
That's a great episode, by the way. I think the particular dynamic with a couple like that is really amazing to see. I wouldn't do it myself. Go ahead.
Brilliant.
Hi.
Hi, Viv. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed and lovely tips as well. Also, please don't consider this a heckle, like no crushing. That's okay. I'm just really intrigued about when it comes to having status, and obviously as your role as a podcaster. When it comes to pre-recorded things, obviously having status is a little bit harder. How do you kind of use status and confidence when you're kind of working in a pre-recorded sort of context?
Why do you specifically ask about pre-recorded? Are you thinking because it's not live, therefore it needs to be perfect, or you have the chance to edit it? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, like I find that like when I'm in a room and I can bounce off other people's energy and things like that, I find that a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But actually, when you're talking to like either a script, like a camera,
Yeah.
or just a microphone, and actually you have to get it really well first time, it's sometimes a little bit harder. And I think that's where I find the status is harder to work on.
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. Yeah, I've struggled a lot with that myself. And when I first started performing comedy, I used, because obviously in comedy you start by doing 5 minutes and you do 10 minutes and you do 20, and then that's your club sets, and then you're trying to get to an hour for Edinburgh. And really you want to be rinsing and repeating the whole time, because you can't just turn up and do new stuff every time. You don't know if it's going to work. And if you want to do it professionally, then people need to see that you have something that can be replicated and is consistent. And I found that I was so much better off the cuff. I struggled with scripted material. A lot of professional performers who are amazing do struggle with scripted material. And I used to always think, I want to make a new rule that all comedy is unscripted. Nobody's allowed to prepare anything. You just have to turn up and talk. But of course, that would be incredibly self-indulgent and rubbish. So I would question really this pressure that you're putting. These are you have to recognize that every situation, every context is different. You can't bring the same energy to an unscripted performance or a live interaction that you can to something scripted. You know, when for example, I would often host an awards ceremony, or, you know, something where there's a script and it's all pre-written of who's going to win the awards and all of that. And sometimes there's 27 awards and it's really going to go on quite late and people are going to get quite drunk. And I would be sometimes tempted to ad-lib, to lighten it, but then that's going to make it longer. And really, I'm only doing that to make myself feel good, so that I don't feel so cringe about going through it. And sometimes you have to just accept, this is my job to do this and it's scripted. I'm just going to try and lift it off the page as much as I can to bring lightness and improvisation and spontaneity to my face, my voice, my eye contact, my interaction with the person. It doesn't always have to be the words. It can be in lots of other things. It can be in your physicality or the energy that you bring to it. This is exactly what actors have to do every single night at the theatre. You know, they don't do it the same every single night. They find a different way to channel that emotion, a different way to lift that script so that it never feels scripted. So and then sometimes I'll tell people in work settings this, and they say, yes, but I'm not an actor. I can't do it. Well, actors are also human beings who have simply disciplined themselves to bring an energy to something scripted, but recognizing that not everything needs to be the same. And you can be good in loads of different scenarios. Some you might excel and some you might be not so great at. That's fine. But you can be good enough in many, many different contexts.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And Viv, I didn't mention in the intro, but you also work a bit with particularly groups of women in business and in media and so on. Is there something different you advise there? And also, you know, for a group like this, they want to explore some of these concepts aside from reading the book and studying it really hard. Are there one or two things you'd say, look, let's get started with trying this or that?
Yeah, there's two questions really that you're asking there. One is about, is this gendered? Because I do work a lot with women. And the other is about, you know, where do you get started in all of this? So the gendered question is really interesting, and I'm finding this with opening this up with Happy High Status, and I'm finding that men do have, and this is a huge generalization, but the questions I'm getting often from men, that was a very good specific question, by the way, they're often quite blanket, and they're quite sort of, how do you become more confident, or how do you work, what do you do if you work with somebody who's arrogant? They're often quite general, whereas women's questions are often more focused on their own insecurities. What do I do if I feel this way? What do I do if I always tell myself this? They're more internally focused rather than looking for some sort of rule book about confidence. So the most important thing to take away there is no rule book. You know, this is not Machiavelli. This is not trying to say, you know, stand like this and everyone will think you're Donald Trump. No, that's not for me. Like, I'm sure somebody can write that book. In fact, I think The Art of the Deal might be that book. Yeah. Of course, there are lots of different ways to inhabit power. But this is not about having a shortcut to being the most confident and amazing person in the room. In terms of where to get started on this, of course, resources. You know, there are loads of great podcasts, as well as How to Own the Room. There's an amazing book by Caroline Goyder called Gravitas, which is a brilliant exploration of how to be calm and in your own energy. She's a brilliant voice coach. There are so many great resources, but I would say there is no shortcut to doing it. I'd rather people actually didn't read my book or listen to my podcast and actually did it. You know, that I give loads of advice in all of the stuff that I put out about how to actually do it. And it's things like, if you go to a birthday party or you have a celebration at work, tap the glass and say 3 sentences about the person. Like, get used to creating moments where everyone turns to look at you. Because it's those moments that we're afraid of, and that we're not used to being happy, high status in those moments. And there's no reason other than, you know, millions of years of human evolution. There's no reason why we should feel scared of everyone looking at us and so-called judging us. Often they're not. They're actually thinking about what they're going to be having for tea. Yeah. Learning that it isn't about you, and it's okay for everyone to turn and look at you and you say these things, and you might say something stupid and it might go wrong or whatever. It doesn't matter. There'll be another day. Yeah. Creating those opportunities is the most important thing, and do it before you're ready. Please don't wait until you're ready. This is especially for women and other people who are not in, you know, traditional alpha groups or who aren't easily picked for leadership. Don't wait until you're ready. You are never ready. You have to get it wrong. You have to be comfortable getting it wrong.
That sounds very scary, though. So you just encouraged us to do something, but then you made it sound very concerning. So how? I'm nervous now.
Yeah.
How do you force yourself to jump in and do that? Can you find a lower stress version of it?
Yeah, well, that's why I say, you know, vote of thanks, 3 sentences, or even 1 sentence. Asking to do an intro for somebody rather than... So many people are waiting to do a keynote without actually having spoken in front of people for 3 minutes. Volunteering for low-key things or creating those moments, but not thinking, I can't do this because I haven't done a TED Talk. That's what I'm talking about being ready. Obviously, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm quite reckless about this. So I do think the more moments you can think, oh, I think I want to say something now. Tap, tap, tap. Here I go. Yeah. That is the way. It's not to do this. So it makes me laugh. Like in real life, right? When you ask somebody to go on a date, when you ask somebody to marry you, when you tell somebody that you're having a baby, right? All of these amazing, incredible moments are the most important moments of our lives, of like personal, emotional moments. We don't script those. We don't think, oh, I better think about what I'm going to say and how it's going to come out, and I better have like some bullet points. We allow ourselves, when those are the heaviest, scariest, most life-changing moments, and we let ourselves be who we are in those moments. So if we can bring some of the energy and the unpreparation and the spontaneity of that into a work environment in a way that is low-key and safe, so maybe, you know, enlist a friend or a colleague to support you, or like start clapping if you've kind of got a bit carried away with it all. You know, have some backup, have some support. There are ways to do this, but don't wait until you're ready, because we are never ready.
Well, and I love that idea of like, you don't have to do the conference keynote as your first sort of foray into this.
No.
That makes it a bit easier.
No. Yeah. Ideally being the the sort of warm up, even if the warm up is just welcome everybody, thanks for coming, here's so and so, volunteering for those kind of things, and often as an extra, not waiting to be asked.
Yeah.
So many people also waiting to be asked, waiting for their boss to say, I've chosen you to do this. No, Seth Godin, choose yourself.
And there's something, I haven't got the quote written down in here, that really struck me, which was sort of the stories we tell ourselves. And you sort of said, look, it's easy to say, I hate public speaking. But what you should be saying is, I hate public speaking when I'm not prepared and it's a huge audience and I don't know the topic. So you just redefine the area of concern a bit.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with specificity.
Yeah, it's very good.
So specificity is so important because nobody really hates anything or finds anything difficult. You need to drill down into why.
Right.
And I've come to this thinking really through talking so much about public speaking and presenting. Everybody knows what we're supposed to do. There's no mystery to any of it. We all know that all the different ways of preparing and how, if you group things in 3, they're easy to remember, have an intro and an outro that you know what to say and know your first words, know your last words, all of these things. But it's not what to do, it's why. Why are you not doing it? And that's going to be the specific thing. And if you can get to grips with why, then you can start thinking, oh, okay, yeah, I do need to be extra prepared, or I do need to make sure that I have a list of 10 data points that I can refer to. And then the rest of it I can ad lib.
Yeah.
Like finding your way of doing it with your own specificity, because we're all different.
Yeah.
That's what's going to work.
Really good, thank you. Anybody else have any questions that you want to ask or contributions you want to make? While you think about that, you've been on, it looks like a mission. If you kind of construct it from now and look back, you've been on this sort of mission to explore confidence and happy high status and how other people think about it, and you've distilled it into this. Where does your mission take you next? When will it be done? When everybody in the room is getting up and asking questions? When will you know that you've kind of...
That's such a great question.
progress?
I feel like it's endless. And that's something that I find actually really depressing and daunting. And I have to constantly motivate myself and remind myself that it's okay. And that it doesn't all have to be fixed. There can be so many moments when I'll think, oh my God, I've been talking about this for 5 years now.
Yeah.
Like the podcast's been going for 5 years. This is really the 3rd book that I've written about this. So How to Own the Room, Lift as You Climb, Happy High Status. And sometimes I'll get asked a question from the audience and I'll just think, oh no, people still feeling so small. When is this mission going to be over? And it isn't, because our human vulnerability and insecurity and the pressures of life are constantly changing and they're really difficult. And so for me, it's not so much like where does the mission end or what's going to prove if the mission has worked. It's more, how do I dig deep to stay motivated and want to keep talking about this? Because I think it's so urgent.
Well,
I can't stand it that people feel small.
I hope you get energy from talking to groups like this. We've got time for a quick final question. Sorry, I've managed the time a bit badly, but if you can be brief, thanks.
Hi, Viv. Thank you
Hi.
very much for your convo. I wanted to ask, what do you think about the idea of developing an alter ego? Imagine something like, for instance, Kobe Bryant being the Black Mamba whenever he's playing and he has to deliver in the most important moments. And walk me through how you think about the concept of developing an alter ego and how, for example, you think about it in the context of happy high status. I'm just really curious about your
Yeah,
opinion on that.
love that question. So it's always been fascinating to me that Beyonce, who is clearly massively happy high status, I mean, we'd have to invent a whole other word to call her happy high status. For her, that is Sasha Fierce, right? So she has created this alter ego. And you often hear performers, especially performers who are really quite bombastic and can own a stadium, who've had to think about this. I saw an interview the other day with Tina Turner where she said, when I'm at home and I'm having a cup of coffee, I am not Tina Turner.
Yeah.
Like, it's too exhausting to be Tina Turner every day. And I need to save her up and, bust her out. I've had the same interesting, slightly different energy kind of comment from the novelist Anne Patchett, who says, when she's at home, she actually takes her husband's name when she's at home in her day-to-day life, and she's just quiet and she does all of her stuff. and she does her writing. And then when she goes on tour, she says, I put on my Anne Patchett head. Right. And she almost imagines it like a papier-mâché head that she puts on of, yes, I am now the novelist, Anne Patchett. I think sometimes these things are relevant for people with a public persona, and it's actually to do more with public and private. For everyday life, I don't know how useful it is to pretend to be something you're not. And certainly...
It's generally stressful in
yeah,
my
don't
experience.
tell other people you're doing it, definitely. But if it... Sometimes it helps me more, I would say for me personally, and I do this a lot as a performer, I might do it if I'm doing something like this, is to think of a word. Like, it could be wow, or it could be calm, or it could be kind. A word that I want to channel for that particular moment. You know, it could be anything like precision, clarity, generosity. You can use something that's specific to the task, your task in hand in this moment, to convince these people of this thing, to give them this thing. That for me is more useful as a gift than to try and convince myself that I'm very, very bad imitation of Sasha, not very fierce.
That's a great idea. I love the idea of putting on the sort of the scarf of confidence or the hat of high status rather than sort of trying to pretend to be somebody you're not.
Yeah, or just having an intention like clarity or excellent delivery of data. You know, that would not be mine. Yeah. But I'm sure other people would find it really useful. Or your generosity, all of these things, especially things that you think are in short supply, to channel that one intention.
Unfortunately, time for us is in short supply. Did you see what I did there? So, can I just say, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Viv, and to read your work and to listen to your stuff. I learned so much, and I know that our audience here has done so. Could you please say a big thank you to Viv Groskop? Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. And thank you very much, Viv. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have a good day.